kind of a follow-up to show you how a basic virtual host configuration would look. Because with the Meteor virtual host, we had to omit certain information that would normally be in a static website's virtual host, and we had to add stuff in. So let's go ahead and get to creating a virtual host. So I'm going to open up Terminal here. I'm going to change directory first into my HTML directory, and I'm going to create a new directory called Site1 and another one called Site2. And if I list the directories, we now see that I have a Site1 and Site2, and in each one of these I'm going to put an HTML file. So nano, let's go Site1 index.html. And in here I'm just going to type, this is our first site located at Site1 .localhost. Control O and Control X. And I'm going to do the same thing in the Site2 directory. And I'm just going to close that. And we're not going to use any HTML markup or anything. This is just going to be to show you guys how it's going to work. So let's go over to our Apache's directory. So that's in the etc directory, Apache 2. And I'm going to create two files in here in the sites available directory. And so the first one I'm going to create is sites available site1.conf. And so what we need to do is open up virtual host, and I missed the capital V, so virtual host at any web address on port 80. This is going to listen to try and find our site here. So the first thing we need is a server name, and this is going to act as the URL or the domain. So if I was going to point example.com to this server, to the IP address of the server, and then once a request, say if I go into a browser and go to example.com, what happens would be that the request reaches the server, and then it parses all these enabled websites to get further information about where the site is stored, and even if you're using modules for it, you can do that in a virtual host as well. For right now, it's just going to be site1.localhost. And then we set a document root. And this is an absolute file path into our documents root. So in this case, it's in our HTML directory, and it's at a subdirectory called Site1. And I'm going to Control O to save this. I got to do this as sudo. So let's run that previous command with administrative privileges, and I'm going to write it out again. So virtual host at any web address on port 80, and then we have to close it. The first one is server name. That's going to tell it basically the name of the site, where the domain or subdomain is located at, or the subdomain we want to use for it. And then the document root is where the files are located. And then I can just Control O and Control X. And then I'm going to do the same thing for Site2. So sudo nano sites available and site2.conf. So as you can see, it's all the same. The only difference is going to be that we're going to reference Site2 in both the server name and the document root. So it's going to be at var www html site2. So I'm going to save this and exit. And we actually need to go into the hosts file to create that internal route to come to localhost. And so what we need to do is run sudo nano hosts, and that is in the etc directory, but I'm in the Apache directory, so sudo nano, one directory up in a file called hosts. So you'll see the app.localhost, which we created in the last video. And this is going to be site1.localhost and site2.localhost. And so the hosts file on a Linux system is basically just a way to create your own records of redirection and whatnot, and different hosts to resolve by different domains or URLs. So I'm going to save this and exit, and I'm going to start the Apache service. Actually, what I've got to do is sudo a2n site. We've got to enable the site. And then we need to restart the service. So system control restart Apache 2. And if I open up a web browser, we should be able to see the different routes actually in effect. So let's go to http site1.localhost. And it says this is our first site located at site1. And if I change this to site2.localhost, you'll see that it's the second virtual host site. And so if I were to go into, where's that? var www html. Here you'll see what we've got going on. And so you can have as many websites in here as your disk space permits, and you can serve up each at its own domain name. So that was a brief video about what a virtual host is and does. I hope you guys found it informative. So now what we're going to do is set up a WordPress installation on top of our Apache 2 environment. And so the first thing that we're going to need to do is actually go grab the WordPress zip file from wordpress.org, and then we can extract it and put it into our HTML directory. So just go to wordpress.org and click download WordPress. You might have a different version here if you're watching this, off in the future somewhere. Once it's complete, just open up your file manager, and it should have gone to downloads, and just right click it and extract here. And when we go in here, we want to make sure that we're copying all these files, and actually the directory containing all these files. So I'm going to copy this directory here that I just created, and I'm going to go to computer, in my var directory, www, HTML, and I'm going to drop it right here. Now we need to create a virtual host for the WordPress directory. So let's open up Terminal, and let's go into our Apache 2 directory, sites available. Now, first thing I'm going to do is enable a module so that the WordPress installation will be able to use pretty URLs or permalinks. So we need to enable mod rewrite. And how we do that is through sudo's through Apache's a2nmod command. So sudo a2nmod rewrite. I've already got it enabled, but you guys should see a confirmation there. So now let's create our virtual host for our WordPress installation. So sudo nano wordpress.conf. As always, we open up the virtual host and we close it down here. Now we need to give it a server name. And so we're just going to use wordpress.localhost. Localhost. And most of Apache is camel case, by the way, so there's a capital letter at the beginning of each word in a directive. And so server name right here, that's a directive. Think of it like in programming, if you set a variable, that's essentially what's going on here, except it's not called a variable, it's called a directive. So the next thing we need to do is set the document root. And this should look exactly the same as it did in the last video. We're just going to point it to a different directory. And now we actually need to configure some things. So open up a directory element and just put a / here. So we're going to configure the root directory first. And we're going to put options follow symlinks, and then allow override all. And then we need to configure the directory of a WordPress installation. So directory var www html WordPress, and then close that directory element down here. And so we're going to allow it to follow symlinks. We're going to allow it to override URLs, and we're going to basically order allow and deny. And so I'm not going to go over too much what all of this does, but this is the basic configuration for mod rewrite in virtual host. So options, indexes, follow symlinks, and we're actually also going to add an option for multi-views as well. Down here we're going to type allow override all, and then order allow comma deny, and finally allow from all. So this is going to make sure that htaccess files work in the rewriting, and we'll have a look at custom htaccess rewriting here in the next few videos somewhere. So let's save this and then exit. And let's enable this site, sudo a2n site WordPress. Now we restart Apache using system control. Failed. Let's have a look at why it would fail. So system control status Apache 2.service. We must have got something wrong. Valid command options. Interesting. Let's see. Oh. Okay, I think that was the only issue there. Let's try restarting again, and we're good to go. So let's go edit our hosts file. So sudo nano hosts. We're going to create another redirection here internally to our system, and it's going to be wordpress.localhost. Save and exit. And then we should be able to go to wordpress.localhost and start setting up the server. Now, actually, we're going to have to create the database first. So let's go to localhost /phpMyAdmin and just log in here with the same information that you created in one of the previous videos there about phpMyAdmin. And just hit new. We're going to create a new database. I'm going to call it WP1 and hit create. And that's all we need to do in here. So on the WordPress installation, just go through it graphically, and I'm going to show you how to do it manually in a moment. So the database name is WP1. The username, this is going to be the information for the MySQL user that we created when we set up MySQL. So in this case, it's root. And the MySQL password. One sec. I actually used a password here that I use for some other things, so I'm going to mask that here by using the password type. Hit submit. Can't create the WP config file, so I'm going to have to create it manually, and after that we can run the install. So just come back here to the HTML directory, and in here there should be WP config sample. Basically we'll look at that in a second. For right now I'm going to create wp-config.php. I'm going to open this with text editor, paste that in here, hit save, get out of there now. We should be good to run the install. So this site title is going to be Nick's new site. Username, let's create a username here. Password, I'm going to copy this because I'm not going to put it in when we log in. And my email. It's going to take a few moments to do, but it should return with a success message in just a moment. There we go. I'm going to save that password actually. Let's go log in. And as you can see, we've got a fully functioning WordPress site installed on our Apache server. It's really that easy. If I go to Hello World here, you're going to see this really ugly URL. So let's take care of that. So how we're going to do that is by actually going into the dashboard, and in settings there's a permalinks setting page. Click on that. And here you can choose different structures for the URLs. And so this one right here, the post name, that's the prettiest. And so that's what we're going to use. So let's save those changes. And actually our htaccess, so this directory isn't writable by the server, and that's because we have the server running under the user Apache 2 instead of under our user, and then the files in here in the directories in our HTML directory is owned by our user. And so what we're going to have to do is change the user that Apache is running at to match our user, and then everything will be fine. The web server will be able to read and write all these files and whatnot. But for right now, it doesn't. And so what we're going to do is create a new document. We're going to call it .htaccess. Then we're going to open it with a text editor. And what you need to do is basically copy this over here. And something that I noticed actually is that this won't work. I'm going to save this. Save it. I'm going to save this right here. And if we refresh, it's actually going to work. All right. Let me have a look here. Let's open, rewrite. Okay. So it will work, actually. Good stuff. It was giving me a server error before, but basically this line right here, this rewrite rule, I had to remove it and then everything worked. So if you guys have problems, try removing that third line that says rewrite rule index PHP. Try removing that and everything should work fine. But we've now got a full WordPress site set up with permalinks enabled, and from here, I mean, you can just go and create your own pages, posts, and stuff like that. From this point forward, this is basically just all WordPress. So that's awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it informative, and we're going to be going over more Apache stuff in the next video. Hey guys, sorry if I sound a bit off for the next few videos. But what we're going to do in the next few videos is Python. And so we're going to start with the basic installation and how to check your version and a few basic things about Python like the command line interface idle. So on Ubuntu 15.10 and the derivatives of that Ubuntu system, you're going to have Python 3.4 pre-installed and Python 2.7.9. And so there's two active versions in development by the Python guys. And basically, if you're going to be developing a new program, I usually recommend using Python 3. And if you want something, if you're jumping into an existing project that's using Python 2, you would need Python 2. Now the changes between the two are very minimal, but they are code breaking. So you can't just run a Python 2 application using Python 3. It won't work. So what we're going to be doing is actually using Python 2, and that's because we need to use a few modules, and we're going to circle back to Apache because we're going to be deploying a Python application through Apache and make it accessible to the web. So first thing, let's check what version we have of Python. So it's 2.7.9. Now, the first thing that we need to do is install the Python. It's called pip. I don't recall what it's an acronym for or an abbreviation, but it's basically Python's own package manager. And so to install that, type sudo apt-get install python-pip. This will install pip to your system. Now, if you're going to be using Python 3, you're going to need Python 3-pip. And instead of running pip as a command, you would run pip3. But for now, we're working with Python 2, so I'm going to install this. I believe it's already installed on my system. It is. All right. So you guys should be able to install it this way. And once it's installed, we can actually use it to install Python modules. And we'll get to that in the next video. Now, something I want to cover very briefly here is the Python interpreter. So Python is an interpreted language where like C and C++ are compiled languages, and so they're different. You wouldn't typically compile Python application. So you could actually use a real-time CLI or command line interface program called idle just by typing Python in the terminal. And here, for instance, we can set, I was starting to type JavaScript there. So to set a variable in Python, you just type the name of the variable. So I'm going to call it age, and then equals 300. Now, if I print age, it's going to print that number, and you can see this is real time. So that's awesome. Now, if you hit Control Z, it will exit. If you want to use a different version of the Python interpreter, you can, for instance, type Python 3, and it will use the most recent version of Python 3. You can also type that, and if you have that installed, that specific version, you can run that interpreter. So that's how to use different versions in the terminal. And that's basically it for this video. Python's already pre-installed, so you're good to go. In the next video, we're going to be covering modules and a few other things. So I wanted to take some time to talk about how truly powerful Python is and why it's so powerful. So a lot of what I see when people learn Python, they'll get a handle on the syntax and the internal functions and the way to use Python. And then they're kind of wondering, like, well, how is this practical? Like, what can I do? Or, they're basically missing modules. And so modules are the way that Python has been extended to be such a great environment to program in. So we're going to be looking at one specific extension or module in Python. We're going to install it, and we're going to start using it. So what we're going to do in the next video, we're going to deploy our Python application through Apache. So we're going to be using a Python module called WebPy. And what WebPy does is basically it just allows us to use Python to serve a web page. So what we're going to do first is install the module. So type sudo pip install web.py. Now I've already got it installed. You guys should see a little download progress bar, and it should return with a success message. And once it does, you can start using web.py. So I'm going to actually open up gedit right now. And we're going to start using it. And I'm just going to set up a basic example of this web.py. So let's first crunchbang user bin Python. Now, here's how to import modules in Python. You just type import, and we're going to import web. And we're going to set a variable called URLs. And so we actually have to do something first. Python requires 4-space indentation. And gedit is automatically set up by default to do 8 spaces. So I'm going to change that to 4. Jump out of here. Now here we're going to define routes. So the root is going to reference a class called yClass. That's it. Now we're going to create that class. So class myClass. And in the class, basically what returns the HTML is the method get. So you run def get pass itself. And for right now, let's just return H1, hello world, H1. Now at the bottom here, outside of that class, we're actually going to set the application variable equal to web apps. So application equals web dot application, and we're going to instantiate this here. So the first parameter is URLs. It's going to take our routes up there. Then globals, and that's it actually. And then WSGI func. That's it. So let's save, and I'm going to save this into our HTML directory actually. So var www HTML. I'm going to create a new directory here. I'm going to call it Python, and in here I'm going to call this file main.py. So if we had multiple classes that we wanted to return multiple routes, basically what I would do is say about second class like that, and I could define my second class here, and I would basically just define the get method the exact same way. Pass itself, and then return an HTML string. And I mean, you could even load up HTML template files from files here, and inject variables into the template's HTML file, and then return that as a string. And that's a more practical application. But we're not going to get that in depth into it. I'm going to save this here. And that's all we need to do. So in the next video, we're going to be installing an Apache module in order to serve this up through Apache, and we'll configure a virtual host for it. So thanks for watching this. I hope you guys like. Hey guys, welcome back. So we're all done the development stuff now, and we're moving on to some more basic Linux stuff. And I say basic because this current module is all about users, and so it's all pretty simple stuff, but it is the reason we decided to do the development stuff and the other stuff before the user stuff is because this is less used, it's less commonly used, and so I don't think it's as important as the other stuff. However, it's still important. So let's go ahead. We're going to do this both graphically and through command line. First, let's do it graphically so we can get that out of the way and then get to the fun stuff. So open up system settings. I realized that my desktop environment is now different from the one that we started on. So if you're still on Unity, just open up dash and type system settings or just settings. It should find it. If you are on GNOME or any other desktop that uses a full screen launcher with a search, it's going to be the same. If you're using a menu, you would usually find this by going into System Tools, and there should be a System Settings right there. Now, this System Settings application, it should look the same on a lot of different desktop environments that use GNOME components. And so, as far as I'm aware, there's most desktop environments actually use GNOME components, including GTK and stuff. So if you're using a GTK desktop environment, this is probably going to all look the same. If you're using KDE or any KDE-based desktop environments, it's going to look vastly different. Either way, you should have a user accounts item in here, and so you're just going to click on that. And now we've got no access in here. We can't do anything right now because we didn't launch this application as sudo or root, and so we have no authorization over this program to do system level stuff. So we need to unlock it. So just click unlock and then enter your
Linux password here. And now these buttons become enabled. So hit the plus symbol, and you're going to create an account. Standard is basically a standard user account that doesn't have access to sudo. An administrator would be an account that does have access to sudo. We're going to get to that more in a moment. But first, we're just going to create a regular user account. I'm going to give it a name, and I'm just going to do this. It's going to create the account, and we're good to go. Now we could log out to the login manager or the display manager and log in as this user, or we could go into command line and switch user to this user and then do stuff if we wanted to. I'm not going to. For the sake of this video, so we can get out of the GUI stuff as quickly as possible, we're going to just learn how to delete user accounts. So just highlight it in the list on the left and then hit the minus button here. You're going to get a prompt. It's going to ask you if you want to delete files or keep files. If you choose to delete files, this user's home directory is going to be removed. If you decide to keep files, it's just going to leave it. So I'm going to delete the files here because I don't need them. And then I'm also going to delete this user account here. So that's all there is to it. Let's get out of here and learn how to do this in terminal. So go ahead and bring up your terminal. And in here, we need to use a program or a command called add user. And so we need to run this as root. So type sudo add user, and then the username of the account you want to create. So I'm just going to create nick2. Put in your sudo password. Now it's going to add the user. It's going to add a group for the user, and then it's also going to add the user to the group, and all this other stuff. And then we need to set a password for this new account. So just go ahead and type a password. And you can also add additional information about the account if you want to. If you don't want to, just hit enter through all these and then hit Y and enter. And now we've got a new user account. So let's switch over to that account and have a look. So type su nick2. We enter the new account's password, and now you can see what user we're using in terminal at the prompt. So it's going to say your username at computer name. And also after here, if we're in any directory, it's going to tell us what directory we're in. We're still in the Nick Germain directory because that's our main user account where we're coming from, and that's the directory that we were last in. So if I type sudo nano text file, it's already added me to the sudo group, so we don't even have to worry about that. Actually, it hasn't. Okay. I was thinking that's a bit weird because it shouldn't have been prompted for the password, so I assumed it did. So this is actually exactly what we wanted to see. We're going to figure out how to get nick2 into the sudoers file. So let's go ahead and switch back over to our main account. So let's enter your password. And then we're back in this account. In order to add nick2 to the sudoers file, it's really simple. Just type sudo add user nick2 sudo. So basically, this command is the same as when we went to create the user, except there's one difference. There's now a fourth parameter in the entire command. So sudo, let's mark that off. We know what that does. Add user is the program we're using. And then there's two additional parameters now. If there's only one, it's going to assume that you're actually adding a user and that's all you're doing. If there's two parameters, what it's going to do is it's going to add the first parameter to the second one as if it was adding a user to a group. And so that's exactly what this is going to do. This is going to add the nick2 user to the sudo group so that it can use sudo. So just hit enter here and we're done. So now we can switch back over to that account. And to demonstrate the sudo privileges, it actually already gave us a new message here, logging in as sudo for the first time. So let's go ahead and use that command. Just make sure everything is working. So sudo touch text file. Good stuff. Now if we list the directory, we've got text file there. So now we can sudo rm text file. And then ls again, we're good to go. So that's how to add users to the account. In the next video, actually, we're going to learn how to delete users. It's probably going to be a really short video. So thank you guys for watching. Hey guys, welcome back. In the last video, we learned how to graphically add and delete users. And in Terminal, we learned how to add users and add users to groups. So we're going to bring that full circle at this point, and we're going to learn how to delete users from Terminal. So go ahead and open up Terminal, and I've got a user created called Nick2, and that's the account that I'm going to delete. So let's go ahead and run this command, sudo del user, and then the username, and that's it. And now, if you see this message here, removing user, group has no more members, and then done, that's exactly what we want to see. So if I went ahead and tried to switch into that account, it's been deleted. So that's all to this video. Thanks for watching, and in the next video we're going to be doing some more fun terminal stuff. Hey guys, in the last video we took care of deleting users, and now we're actually going to move on to how to change a user's password once the user exists. So it's pretty self-explanatory how you do that through GUI. And so we're going to focus on Terminal here. And it's very simple. We're about to learn a new command. So go ahead and type sudo passwd and then the username of the account you want to change the password to. Now you'll get a prompt. You can go ahead and add a new password. And that's literally all there is to it. This is how you would change a password for any user account. And it's really simple. So thanks for watching this video. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to learn how to create new groups and why we would do that. So for a moment, before we do this, we're going to talk about file permissions again. And this is something we covered very early on, but it actually is relevant now. So I'm going to create a file here called text. And if I'm going to make a directory here called group stuff, and then move text into group stuff, and then change into group stuff. Just keep things a bit organized here. And then I'm going to list the directories here. You'll see three fields here. Basically, it's read, write, read. And what this means is owner, group, and everyone else. So I'm actually going to play around with the user account that I created a few videos ago. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add that user to a specific group. So right now, this is owned by the user, Nick Germain, so this becomes relevant to this section. The group here becomes relevant to this section. So I'm actually going to change ownership of just the group here of this file. So I'm going to chown so I actually need to create the group first. Good stuff. So now we're going to create the group, and how you do this is type sudo group add tt. That's going to be the name of the group for whatever reason. And now we can run chown germain tt on this file. Let's run sudo bang bang. There we go. So now it's owned by my current user account as well as the group, which has read-write access. So now if we add our second user account to that group, and then log in as that second user and attempt to edit the file, we should be able to, because we should have read-write access. So in order to add a user to a group, we already learned that actually. So let's go ahead and sudo add user nick3tt. And now if I change user to nick3, I should be able to edit that file without problems, without using sudo. I'm going to Control O to save and exit. And so that's why, well, that's, a really fundamental reason why groups are used. And it may be relevant to you. It may not entirely be, but it's still good to know how a system works with permissions. So I hope this actually, made more sense of the permissions from the previous videos. I tried to explain it the best I could then, and maybe seeing this will help you guys understand it if you didn't quite, get it at that point. So that's all for this video. Thanks for watching. Hey guys, welcome back. So we're all done with the user accounts and groups and stuff, and we're going to move on to networking. Now, networking is a big topic in and of itself, and so there's no humanly way possible I'd be able to teach you everything there is to know about networking, and I don't plan to. What I plan to do is give you guys the most essential and necessary information about networking, and then you guys can take that if you want and further develop it, but this should be a starting point for you. It should help you understand what's actually happening on a network and even what a network is. So for people new to I guess computers and technology, and maybe not new, but maybe you've used the internet before and you just haven't thought about what's actually happening. And that's how I was for a long time. Actually, I had worked with an internet service provider, and before I worked there, I just thought the internet was magic. That I open up a web browser and type in a series of letters and separated by a few dots, and that somehow magically, I didn't really care how it happened at that point, it went out and found a page and magically brought it to my computer. And so if that's the kind of understanding you guys have at this point, this is going to be some really great information for you guys to take and really absorb. In this video, we're not going to be doing anything. We're not going to be learning about networking specifically on Linux. We need to understand a few general concepts before we get to that. And so this video is going to be a sort of introduction to networking on Linux and an introduction to networking in general. So right now, you are on a computerized device watching this video, which is on the internet. And the way that's happening is basically you're connected to a router or a modem router all-in-one device, and the router is connected to your internet service provider, and your internet service provider has devices that are connected to the bigger world of the internet. So you send a request. If you open up a browser and type in google.com and then hit enter, your web browser sends that as a request. It's basically saying, okay, this is the web page that this computer wants to look at right now. It sends that through your router, which sends it to your internet service provider, and your internet service provider has all these fancy computers that properly route certain requests to DNS servers, any request actually. And what a DNS server does is it says, okay, you gave me this string of text, a domain name or a URL, and I have a record here that shows this domain or string of text is supposed to serve up the content at this IP address. And so how the internet works is it doesn't understand google.com or facebook.com. The internet uses network addresses, right? And so think of it like each web server, each server out there has an address, just like every house on your street has an address. So if you were going to send somebody down the street to Joe's place, you would say, okay, well, go to this address. Then you would give them the address of Joe's place, and they would be able to find it. Right? The same thing is happening on a DNS server. You give the DNS server a domain name that you want to look at, and then the DNS server takes that and says, okay, well, I know this domain name is supposed to route to this IP address, so you request, you need to go over to this server to get that content. And so your request then gets translated to an IP address and other information, and it gets sent to the web server that it's supposed to be at. And then the web server running Apache or anything really, Nginx, or I'm sure there's tons out there that I don't know about, but the web server receives your request. It receives all of the information related to it, so cookies, session variables, stuff like that, as well as the exact item you want to look at. So if you go to website.com/something/something else, everything after the .com/ is called a URI, and that indicates what piece of content on the server you want. So think of the first part, domain.com, as what server you need to be communicating with, and then afterwards, /about.php or something. That's going to tell the server, once it gets the request, what page it needs to send you, and then it does its rendering process, and it sends you that page in the exact same route that your request took to get there. So it's like when you send your friend down the street to Joe's place to pick up a box of pizza, and so your friend walks down the street, he turns left, maybe he turns right, he gets to Joe's place, he walks in, says, hey, I need to get a pizza. Joe gives him the pizza, and then he walks the same way back to your house, and before you know it, a web page has loaded within your computer box. And that's how that happens. I hope you guys understood that. In the next video, we're actually going to cover a few more concepts before we can dive into, really understanding to the point that we can use applications to do certain things in regards to networking. So I hope you guys found that informative. If you didn't, if there's any point in this video that you felt lost or confused, or even that I was just rambling, or even if you just want to tell me, a few more web server applications aside from Apache, there is a comment section to the side of this video, and you just leave a comment. I will reply. I'll get you whatever information you need, and hopefully this will make sense to you. So in the last video, we described how the internet works. What the internet is technically an interconnected collection of networks. So all these little networks all over the world can now be connected to other networks in the world. And so we have the internet, which is just that. So to understand a network, and here we're bringing it down from the top level stuff down to a more localized thing. And so a local network is the type of network that you have set up in your house, where you connect to the router. The router then can interact with the internet for you, and then return the information to your computer. Now, I wanted to talk for a moment about IP addresses and the current issues that face them while still using IPv4. So, let's go ahead and open up a document here. So an IP address looks like this. This is an IP address of a server somewhere, probably. If you put this in your... Let's actually try that. That was just a random one that I just wrote up. See what happens. This is probably the address of somebody, somebody is connected to an internet service provider, and they get one IP address for all their computers. And the reason why that happens is because these IP addresses can go from 1.1.1.1 all the way to 255, like that. So as you can imagine, the range here is pretty big, but it's not quite big enough for the human population. And so we've been running out of IP addresses for the last 15 or 20 years. And multiple solutions have been brought into the equation to try and solve this problem. One of them was called a NAT. And what this is a network address. Basically, you have one router, you have one IP address. So the IP address you have, let's say, is this one up here at the top. This is your IP address that the internet service provider has given you. Without the use of a router, you can plug one device into the modem, and your computer will use this IP address in requests. So basically, when you send a request to google.com to load a page or to load a search, what happens is your IP address gets sent to Google as well, so that Google can return this data to your device. But what happens when you only have one IP address and 7 computers connected? That's when the NAT comes into place. So this IP address now is the IP address of your modem or router, and it assigns NAT addresses to all the devices on your network. So let's say you just have 2 devices on the network. The first one, actually the IP address of your actual router is likely this. I've seen one instance where a network did not use this IP address as its router's IP address. Okay. The IP addresses that your router will assign to computers in your home all begin with 192. So basically, it would be something like that, right? That would be the IP address. Actually, hold up a sec. I got this wrong. This is the IP address of your router. This is the IP address of your first computer. So it always begins with 192.168. Your second computer might be this. And your third computer might be this. So now you have 3 IP addresses, 3 devices on your network, and your router here is keeping track of them. So from this device, I type google.com into the address bar. What happens is this IP address, along with the request, gets sent to my router. The router then sends the request off to the ISP and then over to the internet and stuff with the IP address of the router, which internally is this, and externally, this is our ISP IP address they gave us. So what happens, this gets sent to google.com. Google.com sends the page back to this IP address connected to the router here. The router then takes that request and connects it with the device that requested it, and then it sends it back to that device, right? And so that's how a router interfaces between a local network and the internet. So in the olden days, before the NAT address and routers really took off, each one of these computers would have had a different IP address. So it would have looked something like this. Right, and so on. So that would have been 3 actual IP addresses when we found a way that you actually only need 1 IP address per network. And so that's what a router does. And so these IP addresses are local, and you're going to see these in terminal. Now, one other special IP address is 127.0.0.1. On every computer, this means this computer. It's basically a self-identifying IP address. If I were to type this into my browser, I would see my local host, where if you put this into your browser, you would see your local host. 192.1, the NAT IP address basically works the same way. So if I were to go to 192.168.0.3, it would try to find a computer only on my network that has this address and then connect to it. So that's how a router works. And in the next video, we're going to be getting into the if config. On Windows, you have an ipconfig command. On Linux here, you've got ifconfig, and we're going to cover that in the next video and a few other commands as well. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.
Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we are going to get to some practical networking things, and this is all in Terminal. And so the first thing we're going to do is bring up Terminal. And first I want to talk about the ping command and what this means and what it does. So you can ping an IP address or a domain name to see if you can get a successful response from it. This is a great way, let's say you're using a web, this is just an example, if you're using a web browser and you're trying to troubleshoot if the web browser isn't working or if your entire internet connection isn't working, you might drop down here to command line and run a ping command on a known host that you know is always going to be up, for instance, google.com. And so that's exactly what we're going to do. So I'm just going to type in the command ping and then the address of what I want to ping. And I'm getting a response, and it tells us what length of time each response is taking to return to us. And so yeah, I mean it also shows other stuff like the exact IP address, the server that it's reaching, and that good stuff. And this is going to just go until you close it, so just Control-C to exit, and then it gives you a breakdown of what happens. So you could let this run for a while to see if you're getting any packet loss through your network card. And so that's what pinging does. So I'm going to clear this up here. We're going to talk about the command ifconfig. So on Windows, in command line, you have a command called ipconfig, and it spits out a whole bunch of information about your network configuration. In Linux, it's ifconfig, and it does the same thing. So I'm just going to make this a bit bigger here, and I'm going to run that command again. All right. So this is going to link our addresses here, or our network interfaces, and also any IP addresses that it has and whatnot. So the first one is going to be an Ethernet, which I don't have plugged in right now, and so it's going to be basically not working. This is the name of that interface. This is our local loopback. So this is like a virtual interface that runs that it has our local host address here, and it basically controls that. And then down here we have our wireless Ethernet, which we can see this is working as I've got received bytes. So RX basically means what you've received, TX basically means what you've transferred out. So that's how to read that. There's an IP6 address right here. And my IP address, or this is going to be my NAT address, and it gives IDs and stuff of the network interface device. And so that's basically how to use ifconfig. Sometimes this might be useful to see if you're getting a valid IP address from the router, and to see if it's actually working at all, which you can see here mine is. So I'm going to clear this. And what we're going to go over now is a command called TCP dump. It's a really powerful command line packet sniffer. So it can analyze the packets that are going in and out of your computer or your network. So first thing we need to do is install it if we don't already have it installed. So sudo apt-get install TCP dump. It's probably already installed, but just in case, I'm going to make sure. And it is, and it's the newest version. So this is a big command line tool, and I was going to do more stuff in the video, but I think we're going to cut it off after this command. So what we're going to do is basically just run the command tcp dump. We don't have permission to capture on that device, so we're going to run sudo tcp dump. And this is capturing all packets that are coming in and out of my my computer, and this is just going to run until you cancel. So I'm just going to cancel here. Now, as you can see, that was a pretty big output. And so what we can do is we can only capture a certain amount. So what we're going to do is that. So how we do that is basically using the tcp dump command with a C. Let's capture 10, and that's good. All right, I've got to run it as sudo tcp dump -c 10. So this is going to capture 10 packets, and that's all it's going to do. Right now it's not capturing any. Let's go ahead and do some updates. So that just captured 10 of the packets from my machine that was essentially coming into my machine. And so we can analyze them a bit. We can see where they're going to and where they're coming from. And so we can see here basically, so the first column is a timestamp, right? Over here we've got the IP address that we're sending from. So this is our machine here, as you recall, and it's sending this packet out to our router, which basically ends up here at this domain. And so that's how to use TCP dump very, very minimally. There are some other options that we can go through as well for this command. So you can print the captured packets in ASCII. So let's go ahead and do that. TCP dump. I'm going to run C10. We're just going to capture, let's capture 5. And then we run -A. And this is going to print out the actual packets in ASCII. So you can use this if you're trying to see, what exactly you're getting. And this just all looks like gibberish to me, but it's the packets that are actually coming through. So that's a neat way to use this command. So basically, if you only want to listen on one network interface, I'm going to run ifconfig again. And we can see WLO1 is the name of this device. So what I'm going to do is run TCP dump as sudo. I'm going to capture 5. And we're going to use -I WLO1. And what that -I does is it tells it to listen to a very specific interface that we define after that -I. Now, in addition to displaying the packets in ASCII format, we can also display them in hex and ASCII. So this may make sense for you if you're looking for some hex response from these packets that are coming in and out. So what we're going to do is run sudo tcp dump $XX -I WLO1. And this is going to print out, I didn't use the C flag, so I'm just going to cancel there. So this is going to print out packets in hex and ASCII format. So I'm going to clear this here. One other neat thing is you can capture packets from specific ports. And so let's go ahead and do that. So let's run sudo tcp dump, and I'm going to show you guys why that's going to make sense here in a moment. -I WLO1, this is the name of my interface, and then port 22. Now, right now, I don't think I have any port 22s going on here, and that's because port 22 is an SSH port. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to my server via SSH, and we're going to see packet activity here. So I'm just going to connect, and here we see a bunch of packets happening. And each time you do something, you can see exactly what's happening here, and you'd be able to parse through these and basically see that there is activity, what kind of activity, and where it's happening between. So that is a bit about the TCP dump command. This is going to be good with troubleshooting network activity. There's not really many other uses that I can think for this, but if you have any uses for this that I don't know about, leave a comment. I would like to know how you guys use this command if you do, or any practical applications that you think this command would serve. Hey guys, welcome back. So last video we looked at a way to really track packets and the packets that are actually being sent to and from this machine individually as packets. And now we're going to talk about a command called netstat, which is an abbreviated term for network statistics. So basically the command that we're going to be using throughout this video is netstat. And based on the flags that we pass it, it's going to return different statistics. So if I put netstat-nr, the N option makes netstat print addresses as dots, dotted IP addresses rather than symbolic host and network names. So this is going to make sense if you want to see the actual IP addresses rather than the domains that are connected to the machine. And so this is what I've got right now. It basically gives us the information that we're looking for regarding the IP routing table. And so the R flag in that command that I just put basically states that we're looking for the kernel IP routing table. And that basically shows what certain things are routed to. So let's actually display network interface statistics themselves. And we're going to do that with the -i command. So we're going to type netstat-i. And this shows us the usage of each of our devices. And so we can see the local host here, which was configured, has sent this many packets right here. And it's received this many packets. As compared to our wireless interface, which so far has received that many, and actually this is bytes, not packets. And this many. So you can kind of see how this would be useful. We can actually display connections to our machine as well. And so I think my system updater is still going. It is. So this is going to be good. What we're going to do is run the netstat with the flags -ta. And this is going to look for active sockets, and it's going to print out the status of them and basically, the foreign address and the local address. So this obviously is our local machine here. These are the foreign addresses that it's connecting to. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to run netstat-tan. And it's going to show IP addresses instead of the host names. And so you can see how that's going to be useful because we can actually combine elements of the different flags that we're passing to the netstat command. And it's basically, going to change the way that each of these outputs works. And so that is how you would use netstat to view active connections and active routes of IP addresses internally through the command line here. And if you're not sure of any, if you think your computer may be connecting to a malicious host or something, what you can do is you can take these IP addresses and you can actually look them up through a website like network-tools. I think it's network-tools.com. It could be .org. I'm not sure, but you can find information about